for this time that we have to come and open your word, Father. Help us to find something new in your word tonight, Father, just something that maybe we haven't seen before. Father, be with us as we study. Father, just thank you for Paul and for the missionary journeys that he went on, Father. Father, just thank you for your hand in each one of those and just your strength and your might, Father, that showed us how to do our own evangelizing in this world. Father, most of all, thank you for your Son. Thank you for his death, his burial, and his resurrection, and the hope that someday we might live with you forever in him. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right. So Acts 16, if you guys want to flip over there. Hey, there we go. So like I said, Paul's second missionary journey. You know, we left him at Antioch last Wednesday, and he stayed with them for many days. And we talked about he and Barnabas splitting up, and Barnabas took Mark, and Paul took Silas on this journey with him. So here's what we're going to be looking at tonight. It's these 5 provinces, 5 cities, I guess, where Paul went to preach the word. And we know that he actually, this thing started off, the second missionary journey started off with him going to Derbe and Lystra and Iconium and all those places to strengthen the Christians that he had left there and the churches that he had left behind, which, that just totally makes sense because you don't want to convert somebody and then go, okay, I'm out. You want to make sure that they know that they're still on fire, that he left them in turmoil there, that the Jews were probably still giving them a hard time, and I'm sure he was excited when he got back to those places where he had established churches and realized, oh, these guys are still doing what I told them and still practicing what I taught them. So now we're going to head over let's go to Philippi first. To Paul in the night, a man of Macedonia was standing and appealing to him, saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, immediately we sought to go into Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. So a couple things to point out. Luke has finally decided, hey, I want to be part of this. So if you notice the we and the us, Luke finally decided, okay, I'm going to be part of, and I'm assuming that maybe they picked him up in Iconium, but I'm not positive. But Luke decided, okay, I'm going to mention that I'm here too. So now we've got not only Paul and Silas, but we've got Timothy and Luke. So 4 missionaries, and they're heading off to Philippi. And we see that when they got to Philippi, they met a lady named Lydia. And if you look at the screen, she was a God-fearing person. She had obviously worship. She knew what she was, she knew at least the Jewish worship, Jewish part of worship. And she was very prosperous because, if you're a seller of purple back in those days, purple was a royal color. It was very expensive to make. If you made a garment from purple, she was paying or getting high dollar for that. And let's look at 16, 14, and 15 here. And it says, a woman named Lydia from the city of Thyatira, a seller of purple fabrics, a worshiper of God, was listening, and the Lord opened her heart to respond to the things spoken by Paul. And when she and her household had been baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come into my house and stay." And she prevailed upon us. So, how many times have we heard this person and their household? So far, it's just been Cornelius, right? Help me out, man. I think so far it's just been Cornelius, maybe. But it's awesome how, Lydia heard the word, but also her household, which Being a rich person, she probably had, because she, at least we know that she had a nice house because she was going to have these 4 men come and stay with her. So she at least probably had, 5 or 6 rooms in this house. It was probably big and nice. Probably had servants, which would be her household. So these people heard the word, believed it, and were baptized. So, which made her a very open-minded person as well, that she just wasn't going to be, okay, I'm just focused on the Jewish, the Jewish sect here. I'm not just focused on that worship. I've got an open mind, and a fertile field was sown there. So if we keep on looking, Paul and Silas, we know, were thrown into prison, and it's because of, each one of these deals has a negative and a positive. So the negative response to the gospel, there was a slave girl with a spirit of divination incessantly followed Paul and Silas. So she followed behind them and continually said, these men are from the Most High God. These men are from, and it's just sounded like it was just day after day. They're walking through the streets trying to preach, and she just keeps saying that, and finally he goes, that's enough. Come out. So the spirit comes out of her. And there's a little story about this, I guess, that the people in that area were very, they had many different gods with a small g. And evidently Apollo, one of the sun god, had killed a dragon. So this is, or some kind of giant python. And they thought that because of that python that he killed, it would go into a person and then give them this Pythian, I think is how they pronounced it. It was them being able to tell the future, or foretell the future, that kind of stuff. So there was, this was like big magic, or big, the gods had given her this ability, when really we know it was just an evil spirit from Satan. Because if you remember, even when we studied about Legion the other day, and even, there's been several times where the evil spirits have said, Jesus, we know you're from the Most High God. Don't mess with us. We don't have a quarrel with you guys, or with you. So we've seen this many times. So here we are with Paul doing the same thing. So it said in 16:19, but when her masters saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. And when they had brought them to the chief magistrates, they said, these men are throwing our city into confusion, being Jews, and are proclaiming customs which is not lawful for us to accept or to observe, being Romans. The crowd rose up together against them, and the chief magistrates tore their robes off them and proceeded to order them to be beaten with rods. When they had struck them with many blows, they threw them into the prison, commanding the jailer to guard them securely. And he, having received such a command, threw them into the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. So something I forgot to mention. Philippi, and some of it's up there, but Philippi was, if we remember our intertestamental 400 years that we studied, we know that we studied about Philip of Macedon and Alexander the Great. And this thing, I got it up there. It was a retired Roman soldier colony. So all of these people were basically Greeks or Roman. There were probably a few Jews. And if we remember, Paul's, the way that he always entered a place, it was go to the synagogue of that town, speak to the Jews first. And then if they didn't listen, then he would say, okay, I'm going to go to the Gentiles. So we know that they were thrown in prison, being Jews, and we're Romans, and we don't want to hear this stuff. I don't want to hear it about your, because they probably didn't really differentiate, these people didn't differentiate between Jewish and Christianity. But then on the positive side, while in prison, an earthquake brought a jailer to Paul and Silas with the question, sirs, what must I do? I got an extra I in there. What must I do to be saved? So let's go ahead and look at 16:26 through 31. And suddenly there came a great earthquake, so that the foundation of the prison house was shaken, and immediately all the doors were open, and everyone's chains were unfastened. When the jailer awoke and saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself, supposing that the prisoners had escaped. But Paul cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Do not harm yourself, for we are here. We are all here." And he called for lights and rushed in, and trembling with fear, he fell down before Paul and Silas. And after he brought them out, he said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" They said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him together with all who were in his house. And he took them that very hour of the night and washed their wounds, and immediately he was baptized, he and all his household. And he brought them into his house and set food before them and rejoiced greatly, having believed in God with his whole household. So here's another whole household. So we just saw Lydia. Now we've got the jailer, the Philippian jailer. So, if you look at what a stark difference that was. When Paul and Silas came in, they probably had no thought of him. He was probably just thinking, man, I don't want to have to do this, deal with these people. Threw him in the inner prison, which would have been no windows, just bars, dark, nasty probably. Threw chains on and put him in stocks, it said. So, and then, but at midnight, and I didn't read that part, but at midnight we know that Paul and Silas were praying and singing, and all of the, and after they had just been beat by canes probably, they're in there singing, and all the prisoners were like, wow. I can't even imagine that, okay, I've seen that these people were beat. They've been thrown in the inner prison, no lights, no hope, and all the prisoners were listening to them and just in amazement. So then this earthquake comes, and I read in my commentary that evidently Philippi was a place that earthquakes happen quite a bit, but this one was a special earthquake, had to have been, right? Because it actually broke them out of their chains. So, I've never been in an earthquake. I've been in earthquakes, been in California in earthquakes, but never had one like that. So here they are. The jailer comes in. The punishment for a jailer, if you're watching over somebody that has the death sentence on them, which I don't think Paul and Silas did, but some of those other prisoners may have. And if they have the death sentence over them and those guys had escaped, that's what would have happened to him. So the jailer would have, whatever the worst punishment was of the person that they're watching, would have happened to him. So he immediately drew his sword, fixing to take his life. And then, then things changed on a dime. So like I said, from throwing these guys in the inner prison to what do I need to do to be saved? Just amazing watching his heart change that quickly. And again, because he did that, his entire household was saved. And also, if you look at that, what was it? Verse 31. I know I've probably spoken about this before, but my Bible is from obviously a person that has Baptist background because, he didn't change any words in the actual scripture, but his notes say they believed, and he quit right there. And that's where, we get a lot of that from denominations that, see, they just believed. And then they baptized him later. But he believed and he was saved. And they use, the denominations will use that quite often on different things. And it's like, you guys aren't reading this right, or maybe you don't know your Greek like you should. But obviously, they've been told that all their life and still accept that. Okay, let's go on. So I got my negative and my positive. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so over in Thessalonica. So they went, so after prison, the magistrates came in. Paul was like, you guys beat me, and I'm a Roman citizen, and you're just going to try to get rid of me? And it's like, So the magistrates had to come in and say, please. I could just see them begging, please go, and there'll be no further actions required here. So they took off, Paul and Silas, and traveled 100 miles southwest of Thessalonica. It says the second largest city in Greece. So again, he went to the synagogue, and it says he reasoned using scripture. So he was showing these people, and it says, and according to Paul's custom, he went to them and for 3 Sabbaths reasoned with them from the Scriptures, explaining and giving evidence that the Christ had to suffer and rise again from the dead, and saying, this Jesus whom I am proclaiming to you is the Christ. Because we've talked about the Jews thinking that the Messiah couldn't have been someone that suffered. He was supposed to be coming in glorious, coming in and bringing them back to fame, basically. So they could not grasp the fact that Jesus would have been the Messiah. And again, we had two things, a negative and a positive, from them preaching the gospel. So if you notice also that in Thessalonica, it said that a few Jews were converted, but there were many Gentiles. I think it was prominent. Let me see. Can't remember for sure. Yeah, okay. And some of them were persuaded and joined Paul and Silas, along with a large number of the God-fearing Greeks and a number of the leading women. And we're going to see that the leading women in several of these next 4 places that they visit. When the world thinks that we don't let women be involved, because that's something that I hear a lot anyway, that they're, we had a woman get up and witness to us. We had a woman get up and witness to us and all these things. But we see that women, even though, it says, even though in Paul's writing he did forbid women to teach men and that type of stuff, we see that women always play a big role in the church and have forever. We've got Lydia that we just read about, and then it says here that there were prominent women that believed. And when a woman believes and she has a husband, he's going to believe most of the time. There's very few times that, like, I always tell Tammy I probably would not be where I am today in the church if I didn't marry her. Because, it's like Steve always says, if you're going to marry a Christian, you want to marry a Christian. And if you don't, if you're not a Christian and you marry a Christian, there are times when that woman can just turn your head and make you see things that you didn't see before, and make you see that I do need to be a Christian. And that's why, I think that's why Luke always says the prominent women, and you'll see that as we read several other places. But anyway, so again, we see the Jews in Thessalonica were non-receptive. They basically were jealous, again, just like we've seen in the last several cities where Paul has gone to set up churches. And again, they riled everybody up and got them, like, okay, we can't have this guy in here making us look bad, basically. But now a positive, in contrast, it says, the non-receptive Jews, by the aforementioned method, Paul persuaded a great multitude of devout Greeks and Gentiles who carefully studied Judaism, and like I said, and the prominent women of the area. So we did have success. All right, let's go to the next one. So they had to basically sneak out, I think, and they snuck out and they headed to Berea, which was 50 miles. And it said it was the most populous city, one of the most populous cities in Macedonia. And we know about the Bereans. I'm going to go ahead and read the whole 10 through 15 here. I'm sorry. I'm in Acts 17, 10 through 15. The brethren immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now, these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the Scriptures daily to see whether these things were so. Therefore, many of them believed, along with a number of prominent Greek women and men. But when the Jews of Thessalonica found out that the word of God had been proclaimed by Paul in Berea also, they came there as well, agitating and stirring up the crowds. Then immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the sea, and Silas and Timothy remained there. Now those who escorted Paul brought him as far as Athens, and receiving a command for Silas and Timothy to come to him as soon as possible, they left. So we see that the Bereans' response to the gospel, Paul's enemies of Thessalonica, much like those in Antioch and Iconium, pursued the apostle, stirred up the city, and forced him to leave. And again, a positive response to the gospel. Thankfully, the Jews of Berea were more fair-minded than those of Thessalonica. They received Paul's message. They researched Paul's message, comparing it to the scriptures. They responded to Paul's message with an obedient faith. And again, we see that Greek women and men also believed and were part of that church. All right. Now we go to Athens. So leaving Berea, Paul sailed 300 miles south to Athens, the literary capital of Greece. There he found more idols than one would find in the rest of Greece combined, an estimated 3 for each of its 10,000 residents. He was so provoked, he took the gospel to the marketplace where he encountered Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. So, when he's just walking through the marketplace, there was a synagogue there, so he went and spoke in the synagogue. But just going through the marketplace and seeing I can't even imagine a place that had 30,000 idols. That's no wonder he was provoked. I mean, and provoked means that he was disturbed in his soul just to see this. So he knew, okay, if I'm going to even try to bring the word here, I've got a really uphill battle with these folks. Because these Epicureans, like it says, were deists who believed that the pursuit of pleasure was the chief purpose of life. And the Stoics were pantheists, which means many, many gods, who believed that God was all and all was God. So basically, I'm okay, you're okay, that type of thing, where, hey, we'll agree to disagree. You want to go your own way and do your thing, and I'll do mine, and we'll all be happy. But the Epicureans sounded like, I'm sure there was some perversion that went on with if you're looking for the pleasure of life, that's all they were about. So I'm sure they were into wealth and into sexual deviation and all different types of things that just made them happy. And Athens being a place where there were many philosophers, such as Socrates and Aristotle, and those folks had all been in Athens. They enjoyed, that's basically all they did every day, was just philosophize to each other and tell each other the newest and greatest thing. And I guess I also read that even in today's world, the Athenians like to say, "What's new?" You know, they still do that, and they still go, "Man, if I could run the world for a day, here's what I'd do." And they're always thinking about things like that. So again, a negative response to the gospel. Some mocked Paul's message. Others delayed their obedience, saying, "We will hear you again on this matter." So we see that Paul was called an idle babbler. They said, "Who is this idle babbler? He's just talking nonsense here." Because they weren't getting what he was trying to tell them. But a positive response, we had a lady named Dionysus and a woman named Damaris, and they obeyed the gospel and joined Paul and Silas and the early church. And it says, "But some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysus the Areopagite." Dionysus, I thought was a woman, but that was Damaris. And a woman named Damaris and others with them. So again, Paul had people that joined him. But so as we go on through the New Testament, we see that he talks about the Bereans in several places in the New Testament as he's writing letters back to the Galatians and to the Thessalonians and the Corinthians. But there's not a letter to Athens. There's not a letter to the Athenians. And we see that he never has anybody that is part of his crew. No one from Athens is part of his, and Roger, you tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think that's what I remember reading. He never calls for somebody to be with him from Athens. So whether he was able to, whether these women were able to, and the men were able to set a firm foundation and have a church there? We're not really sure. And that was something that, like I said, reading that commentary, I was like, oh, I never thought of that. Because, when he's in Rome, am I right? Or do you remember Sharon telling you? I can't remember. I think, but I'm pretty sure that's what the commentary said, that he never had anybody come. You know how he would say, hey, Timothy, come to me, or Erastus, or Philemon even, or there were people that were in these different cities that he would say, come see me, when he was in Rome, in prison. But no one ever from Athens. So I just thought that was interesting, that he poured his heart out and taught the gospel, but it may not have took in Athens. Okay. Last one. So souls were saved in Corinth. From Athens, Paul traveled 50 miles southwest to Corinth, host to the temple of Aphrodite, with its temple and its temple prostitutes serving heathen worshipers. As a city, it was so corrupt, Corinth became a synonym for immorality. Still, it proved to be a very fertile soil for the gospel. So let me go ahead and read this, because there are some people that pop up here that we know. So 18, verse 1 through 21. After these things, he left Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. He came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they were working, for by trade they were tent makers. And he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath and trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. But when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul began devoting himself completely to the word, solemnly testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But then when they resisted and blasphemed, he shook out his garments and said to them, your blood be on your own hands. I am clean. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles. Then he left there and went to the house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshiper of God, whose house was next to the synagogue. Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his household, and many of the Corinthians, when they heard, were believing and being baptized. And the Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking, and do not be silent, for I am with you, and no man will attack you in order to harm you. For I have many people in this city. And he settled there a year and a half, or a year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them. So again, we see another Crispus in his household, which, starts becoming a theme here. And I forgot to mention, Lydia was from, I got to think about it. I can't remember how to pronounce that. How do you say it? What was it? Thank you, Thyatira. Lydia was from there, and I forgot to mention that. And we see that that was one of the lampstands in Revelation. So I just thought, hey, that's cool. Lydia must have gone back to her city and made such an impression that they had a church there. So anyway, so we had Crispus. And I want to read this about Gallio. So 12. But while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul and brought him before the judgment seat, saying, this man persuades men to worship God contrary to the law. But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But if there are questions about words and names and your own law, look after it yourselves. I am unwilling to be judge of these matters. And he drove them away from the judgment seat, and they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. But Gallio was not concerned about any of these things. So I just thought it was great that God had said, don't worry about it. And then the very next thing, when they're going to drag him before this Roman governor, Gallio, he said, I'm not going to do anything to this guy. If you guys have a problem with him, you take care of it. And then they beat the snot out of that Sosthenes guy, which is like, okay, if we can't get Paul, we're going to beat this guy up. And we know that later on, Sosthenes becomes a believer. He becomes a Christian. We see that in Corinthians when Paul writes to the Corinthian church. So it says Paul returned back to Antioch. It says he remained many days longer, took leave of the brethren, and put out to sea for Syria. And with him were Priscilla and Aquila. In Centuria, he had his hair cut, for he was keeping a vow. They came to Ephesus, and he left them there. Now he himself entered the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. When they asked him to stay for a long time, he did not consent, but taking leave of them and saying, I will return to you again if God wills, he set sail from Ephesus. So, basically that wraps up the second missionary journey. And if you look at them, we've kind of gone through the negatives and the positives here. So, and we're reading these. I'm just gonna. We'll finish up here, but reading about Paul and the missionary journeys always makes me feel like a big slacker. Because I have a problem crossing the street and talking to my neighbor about Christ, and here Paul is going hundreds of thousands of miles to people, and sometimes they are beating him, and they're, we've seen him be stoned, we've seen him be beaten, and we know that every city that he went to wasn't a great success. He had problems just trying to get people to listen to him, but we've all been commissioned. I say that, this was to the apostles, I guess, but we should all be on fire to do that. And I find myself lacking in that. I guess maybe that's why God said, you need to teach Acts. So I can get back on fire about this. But, I look at my kids. Both of my kids have gone on missionary trips. I've never gone on a missionary trip even. So that's something I probably need to do. But anyway, a minute of self-reflection. So, okay, we'll just wrap up there. In 2 weeks, let me flip all the way over there real quick. I put a bunch of junk up there. There we go. In 2 weeks, we'll be looking at Acts 18:24 through 21:16. So, you guys want to prepare for that. Now, next week will be singing night. So, and I'm going to, like I said, today was supposed to be my last time to teach, but I'm like, I want to finish this up. So I'm going to go ahead and go through March, if you guys will put up with me. So, all right, thanks, guys.